When there's a bear by your house, you don't grab the gun, you go with the bow? Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. All right, man, this is Scott Groves. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, whenever you're listening. I'm with my new friend here, Zachary Hanson, also known as Zach Hanson, which this is going to be a crazy interview. Maybe it'll go a little not safe for work. Maybe it'll go a little political. He's looking at me through Zoom because the chances of us ever being in the same town are slim and none. And I'll tell you why. It's because Zach recently moved to a town with 38 people in it. He wrote a book called Turning Feral, as he's basically taken he and his family out into the wilderness to kind of sort of live off the land. And what's crazy about Zach is that you see this one side of him, which is like this freedom-loving, guns, ammo, living out in the wild. But then he also grew up in the AI world and until recently worked for a company where he was in charge of machine learning. So this juxtaposition of you being like a techie and a nerd and kind of that Silicon Valley based mindset with also this fur and safe and antlers hanging behind you, like just squaring that in my mind in the first 5 minutes we were talking, it's kind of hard to do that in my head. So other than knowing that you have a family and other than knowing a little bit about your political beliefs from a couple of groups that we're in, can you give us the Reader's Digest version on who is Zachary, where'd you grow up, and how did you come to work in AI and also be a feral, live off the land kind of country boy? Like, this just doesn't make any sense in my brain.
I haven't figured it out either. So maybe like this can be a mind opening experience where we can chat and you can help me figure it out. But yeah, the 30,000 foot flyovers, I grew up in the Southeast, Georgia, around the Atlanta, very suburban. Hunting, being outdoors was on the periphery for me, but it wasn't in my immediate family. So I grew up wrestling, ended up doing just a regular linear path of what I was told to do. Go to college, check, end up getting a job, check. I worked for the government overseas for a little while, lived in Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Republic of Georgia, Saudi Arabia, Vienna, and then came back stateside and tried to start a company, failed a company, went back to school, did that, ended up marrying an ex-wife now, who's an FBI special agent. We traveled around the U.S. and we just really sought out the white picket fence life of live in a neighborhood, mow my lawn every week, and the drudgery of all of that coupled with a career that I ended up growing in artificial intelligence, it kind of ate my soul from the inside out until I eventually ended up having a catalytic event of a divorce and moved to Idaho and just went all in on being outdoors.
And so, wait, can you talk about why Russia, why Kazakhstan or Georgia or wherever you were? Like, was that a government job? Was that a contract job? Like, can you talk about what that was?
Yeah, so when I got out of school, I studied Russian in undergrad, not because I'm good at languages. I do speak it fluently now, but let me back up a second. My dad gave me the option as I was about to exit high school. None of my wrestling scholarship hopes were really panning out. And he gave me the literal option of a hard hat or a fake college application. So, I was like, well, I don't know if my little soft hands are really meant for blue collar work at that time. So I went down that college path and I put off all my electives for a long time till it got to the point where they said, you have to take a language. I sucked at Spanish in high school. And the only other thing that was being offered the semester I had to go all in and take a language was Russian. And there just so happened to be a really good looking girl in the class who I ended up dating and, kind of pushed me over the edge to try it out. And I kind of took to it. So studied Russian, and then I ended up studying abroad in Russia undergrad for about a year. But then I went back with the Department of State after that. Once I graduated, did some policy type of work over there, policy work in Kyrgyzstan, same in Austria and the Republic of Georgia.
You can tell us the truth. We only have like 50 listeners. Were you really in the CIA? Like, it's okay. State Department. Give me a break.
I wish it was that cool, man. But I don't have the cool background story of any of that. Sadly, I'm just a dork who wanted to go around and try to learn a different language or two.
Yeah, isn't that always the background story of people that are in the CIA? They work for the State Department and they're just there to negotiate trade, and really they're killing people.
Yeah, I get that so damn much. It's almost heartbreaking because I tried to interview for the CIA. I did like the whole hotel room like interview, and then I eventually never got past like the oral part of it. And yeah, so now everybody's like, "Oh, you were a spy." I'm like, I wish I was a freaking spy, but I never was.
Yeah, well, seeing what the corruption's going on with the CIA right now, I don't know if you watched any of the testimony from those two whistleblowers. You're probably better off that you didn't end up in that cesspool, because it sounds like a lot of them are actively working against the interests of America, which I don't know why that surprises me, but somehow that still surprises me.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things. And like I mentioned, my ex-wife was an FBI special agent, so I don't necessarily miss those dinner parties.
Yeah.
But it was it's something. But no, wasn't a spy, sadly. That would have been way cooler. Probably have a lot more applicable background for what I'm doing now had I done that, but it wasn't the case.
So let's fast forward to AI, because it sounds like this is something you've been involved with for a long time. And first of all, I don't really know how to even define AI. Like, I know what ChatGPT is. I've seen Terminator 2 probably 150 times because it's my favorite movie. But I don't know what AI is, and I don't know how long we've been building to this place where, ChatGPT becomes an overnight success. And it's like, well, this language model, some people are even arguing that it's not AI, and maybe you can explain that to me. It feels like this is like an overnight trend that's probably been building for 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years. So can you give us kind of like your history in AI, maybe what that means, and like how your career path kind of interacts with where we're at today in 2023?
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head first. Like, artificial intelligence has been around as a function, as an area of study for over 50 years. So it's an extremely long history. Now, like you said, the advent of ChatGPT, kind of this seemingly cascading event of like, oh, it's here now, is less a function of new research in the area, but more in, you might have seen NVIDIA, the company that just, quadrupled in valuation, is a chip manufacturer, right? So it's really the compute power catching up to the math. Like, the math has been there for, ever, but the ability for the computers to crunch large data sets, give outputs in a quick fashion that are actually usable in a business context, that's kind of what's new. So I'm not as bullish on, the alien, or not alien, but the AI overlords taking over.
Right. Skynet's not real.
I don't think we're there, because I've been in machine learning AI for over a decade now, and I started in LLMs, large language models, at IBM. So I was a part of IBM Watson back in the day, started as a product manager there, working on speech to text models. And it was about the time that Amazon Alexa, Google Home was starting to really take hold and getting a little bit better at recognizing speech, giving answers, crawling the web, doing these kinds of things. But it's always been there. But it's always historically been relegated to very domain-specific use cases, meaning if you're a mortgage loan officer, if you wanted to build a model to help you, we would feed it with data specific to your daily type of phone calls, whatever it is that would help you. So that way, when somebody calls you, Scott, to get help with something related to mortgages, it's going to be pretty damn accurate at telling you either what you need or recognizing the language, things like that. But it's just blown up. So now we can do much larger data sets because of the compute power, and it just looks like magic, but it is just math at the end of the day.
So this is kind of reminding me, I can't remember, oh God, I read an article on this years ago about how either a CT scan or an MRI, the concept was there like 50 or 60 years earlier. Yeah, you could shoot magnetic pulses through and you could get a cross-section with the body, but they didn't have computers that could turn that data into an image fast enough. It would take like 4 years to render a CT scan or an MRI. I can't remember which one it was. And then the person would already be dead of cancer. So it wasn't until the computing power caught up with the theory that, oh, now all of a sudden we can look through the middle of your body with this machine. So it sounds kind of like the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good comparison. I think it is theory, the math, everything's been there, but now we have the compute power. Now we have the processing power to do it, A, and then to do it quickly, B. Now, the third part here is not done cheaply. Like the cost of compute power has gone down over the past few years. However, when you think about the money that OpenAI is just churning through to have all of these responses, continually train this LLM, it's probably insane, which obviously they're recouping some of that with their subscription plans, right? The $20 a month or however much you want to pay to be at the top of the queue so your prompts can get processed more quickly. But still, it is a resource intensive type of thing that's going on from a cost perspective. It's not just free. You don't just hit a button. There's something being processed on the back end that is costing a company or whoever's hosting it money.
Yeah.
I
want to come back to that because that's the part that scares me. But I just want to define two more terms. I'll pretend like it's for the audience, but it's really for me because I want to be able to have an intelligent conversation with this, and I don't want to get some of the base knowledge wrong. Can you explain two terms to me that I think get thrown around a lot? One is this large language model, and then the idea of machine learning. Because, of course, you say machine learning, and I'm like, oh, the Terminator can adapt. Of course, there's machine learning, right? That's everything. Yeah. Everything in this conversation, just so you know, we'll come back to Terminator 2. But
great movie.
Yeah, great movie. I would argue probably one of a handful, if not the only sequel that's significantly better than the original, but we'll have that argument at the end of the podcast. So can you define for me what a large language model is and what machine learning is and isn't? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I just put in some zeros and ones and the machine will teach itself. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's a little bit more advanced than that. So can you tell me what those two terms mean?
So I did my master's degree in statistics, so I'll try to keep a little less dorky, but machine learning could be anything from just a simple linear regression model, like just something that is math, where you have multiple inputs and you get a desired output, right? That's machine learning. You are just training some model to do some function for you. So that could be something as simple as crunching numbers, like taking someone's FICO credit score, taking a couple other, their income level, mashing that up in it could be an Excel spreadsheet if you wanted to, and ultimately giving either a credit worthiness score or a potential look at me, I'm drawing a blank.
An underwriting decision. Because we have something similar called desktop underwriting where it does exactly that. It takes the credit score, the length of the accounts, the income, how long you've been at the job, what's your down payment, and we kind of know, as a loan originator, we kind of know when it's going to spit out an approval and when it's going to spit out a decline. But sometimes you're just like, wait a minute, this person's putting 10% down. They have $100,000 in post-closing reserves and assets, but it doesn't like these 2 late car payments they had a year ago. So somehow it's spitting out a rejection or a denial. So that's kind of machine learning. There's all these inputs, and then DU, desktop underwriter, is saying approve or no go.
Yep. So essentially inputs with an output, and that could span a bunch of different modeling types, from something like you just mentioned to something really complex where you use a model that crunches that data in a certain way to give an output or a precision score or a predictability score, anything like that. So that's kind of machine learning writ large, right? Now, large language models, LLMs, is just a specific type of modeling technique. It still falls under that umbrella of machine learning. So you're taking a giant corpus of data. And when I used to do language models at IBM, it would be for specific customers. So they might have, for instance, your podcast. You have all this video, all this audio, and you probably have transcripts for each episode, right? So the language model we might build for your podcast would be trained on all of the data from your previous podcast. That way we could have a better understanding with that language model of how Scott likes to talk. Because if we were going to then, have somebody have a little UI where they could type in a prompt of, give me all the podcasts where Scott talks about, double V cutting cigars, it would pull it up very easily, things like that. But yeah, that's kind of best high level between machine learning, which is math and models writ large, and LLMs, which is a specific subset of that trained on specific data sources. And ChatGPT is just an example of that being trained on an even larger, more broad corpus of data.
Hey, this quick interruption is brought to you by me, Scott Groves, the host of the On the Edge podcast. This podcast is brought to you by me. I'm a loan officer who can help you with a mortgage in all 50 states across the United States. I also coach loan officers. So if you are a home buyer who's looking to get a mortgage, if you're a realtor who's looking to partner with an awesome loan officer, or if you're a loan officer looking for coaching, get in touch with me. It's those sources of revenue that allow us to produce this podcast and get out a new episode to you every week for the last couple of years. So if you're looking for a mortgage, if you're looking for a mortgage lender to partner with, or you're looking for a mortgage coach, I'm your guy. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. So this would have seemed like complete science fiction 10 years ago. And now I totally expect this to happen during my lifetime for maybe like a $10,000 service fee. So tell me if this is possible. Somewhere 25 years from now, I get cancer and probably lip cancer from the cigars. And I'm like, well, by this point, I've got, 12,000 hours of podcasts uploaded to YouTube. I've got 20,000 hours of recorded coaching videos on YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook. I've got hundreds of Instagram, shorts and reels and stuff. I'm going to pay IBM a one-time fee of $10,000. They're going to take 100,000 hours of emails, phone conversations, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when I die, my kid will be able to ask his dad, Scott Groves, for advice long after I'm gone because they've correlated so much data, voice, conversational information, coaching ideas on me. Like, are we getting to a point where somewhere in the foreseeable future, we'll be able to have the Scott Groves AI model to give, my future grandchildren advice?
I'll say yes, but I think the higher probability is that there will be image recognition models that can look at the lineage of your podcast and then pre-identify when you get that little ulcer on your lip to say, hey, Scott, you should probably go into the doctor now to get that little spot checked out and then save you from the cancer, get it treated early, and then you'll just live forever because you'll probably have a blood boy or something like that. And
whoa. Yeah, we're getting close to craziness, right?
Yeah. I mean, but yes, to answer your question, that is probably more likely to be able to have your own corpus of data where you could have essentially your own Scott-esque chat GPT where your kids, your grandkids, could ask questions and get advice in your...
I mean, that'd be so crazy if, you could buy like an AI model like, oh, he's deceased now, but I'd really like my grandson to get advice from Elon Musk on building his first business. And boom, there's the Elon Musk chat GPT model where you can go into his psyche and all of his recorded interviews and everything and be like, Elon, I'm thinking about creating a business that we don't even know what it'll be created because this is 2 generations from now. And my grandkid would be able to get advice from somebody who's been dead for 50 years. I mean, it's like, we don't even appreciate the fact that we're living through the best parts of Star Trek and we're just like fighting about politics on our cell phone that holds the knowledge of the world. It's like, it's bonkers to me. And I'm part of the problem, but it's also bonkers to me how little we appreciate the leaps that we've made since effectively the creation of the iPhone.
Yeah, it's really cool. I remember vividly, maybe this is not safe for work, who knows, but I remember vividly where I was at when I got my first iPhone, and I was in Charleston, South Carolina. And I remember someone stopping me. I worked for Red Bull at the time, and I was going into like a Red Bull fashion show in downtown Charleston, and I was stopped by the security guard, this huge guy, and he looked at me. He's like, "Is that one of those new iPhones?" And I was like, "Yeah, man." I'm like, "You'll never take a shit the same way again in your life."
Totally.
And yeah, and I remember saying that, not just tongue in cheek, trying to be funny, and it's the truth. Everybody sits on the toilet wherever they're at, just scrolling, looking at everything. And if there's nothing else, the iPhone has changed that forever.
I can't remember who it was, but there was a comedian that had a great bit on this. He was like, nobody knew they needed an iPad until the iPad was created. It's like, I got a phone that has a tablet on it or a screen on it, and I've got a computer and I've got a laptop for the in between. Like, no, they basically created a whole niche of like product, right? And this comedian goes on to say that, like, how this happened, right? Like, there's a bunch of developers in Steve Jobs' office. He goes to the bathroom to rub one out. He's watching porn on his iPhone, and he just comes running out with his pants down around his ankle. He's like, make it bigger, make it bigger. I want to see these tits in 3D. And I was dying because that's pretty much what it is, right? It's like porn drives a lot of technology innovation. I can totally see somebody at the Apple factory being like, what would be cool? What would be cool is if we could watch this porn instead of like a 4x6 card on a 8.5x14. Yep. That would be way better. So, I agree with you. How long ago did the first iPhone come out for content? Was that 12 years ago, Chris? 14 years ago?
2006 or 7, I think. Maybe a little earlier.
You got to look this up, Chris. He'll find it. He's a good researcher. Because I remember I bought the first iPhone and I was so mad because they wouldn't let Google Maps integrate with it that 2007 was the launch. So, we're going on 16 years of iPhones and how much the world has changed from then. So I got away from the iPhone for like 10 years, and then I was the last holdout in my group that was causing everybody's text message to go green, and they finally got me. So, all right, so can you talk a little bit about your career path in AI? Like you said, your degree is in statistics. How do you end up becoming project manager for IBM and like working in this world of high tech?
Yeah, so after I got done doing the non-spy stuff and I came back stateside, I decided to start a company. I had no idea what to do. I had an undergraduate degree. I hadn't gone to grad school yet, and started a company. And it happened to be a little algorithm, which I did not build, but one of our other partners did, based out of Miami. And we fucked it up royally. I mean, there's no way to put it. Like, we did everything wrong you could. Like, we had initial success, but then ultimately didn't have a good pricing strategy, no go-to-market, none of the stuff that you really needed to do to succeed.
Did you sign an NDA? Can you talk about what that product was or how it failed?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Okay. No. This was our own thing, and we burned it to the ground. It was a rewards play. So we were all coffee shop dorks, I guess you could say. And, we always got the buy 10, get one free punch card. So we said, hey, we should build a little algorithm so that every time you go into a store, you can verify with a QR code and you get an automatic discount. But if you came in the next day, your discount should go up. So if you started off with a 7% discount and then Scott goes in the next day to the same coffee shop, he should get 8 or 9. Next day, 10 or 11, and build that up to a preset cap by the store. So if you come in every day for 30 days, you're going to get what would have been that 10th free cup of coffee free then, but you're doing it every day.
Nice. And you're gamifying and giving them this weird reward system to come back. That's like a great consumer behavior app.
Yeah, but then there was a decay built in too. So then if Scott skips a day, you get a little notification on your phone say, hey, Scott, you really suck. Your 8% discount just bumped down to 6. You should go back in and try to keep it high.
Yeah, I love that. It's gamifying the reward system. Brilliant, but you fucked it up.
Well, we fucked it up. It was just it was a flooded market. This was the time when Starbucks just came out with their own rewards app, Caribou Coffee. We were just up against giants, and we were in 20 stores in Miami, and we just didn't have a way to really grow and screwed it up. So we all licked our wounds and went into industry. One of the guys is a big wig at Meta, the other's a big wig at Coinbase, and I'm just me. But that's when I went to IBM and I started in management consulting, right? Just on a plane, Sunday to Thursday in the Valley. Mostly I was working at PayPal, Williams-Sonoma, doing like data strategy, something that was new to me. But in that path, I met a product manager from Watson, and I was just chit-chatting with him internally. And I had that aha moment. I'm like, oh, like, what does a product manager do? And they're like, well, we take stuff to market. We think about it. We come up with what we want to build. We get the engineering teams to build it. And then he listed off all the things that they do that we didn't do in our startup. I'm like, shit. Had I known what product management was at the time, maybe it wouldn't have screwed it up so bad. So I kind of bullied my way into a role in IBM Watson. They brought me in, and that's where I started to cut my teeth. So I spent some years there.
Was Watson before or after Deep Blue, the one that beat the chess player for the first time and proved that AI was a real thing?
So what that is Watson kind of personified. When
Okay.
I joined later, though, it was the commercialization of parts of Watson. So
Got it.
IBM Watson was the whole Deep Blue situation where, it did play the top player in the world, ended up beating them. So that was the kind of nexus or genesis of IBM Watson. But I joined at the commercialization of that, where we were selling APIs for companies to use, APIs, application programming interfaces, where you pay a SaaS or software as a service subscription fee to hit our API, which would have been like a speech to text model, like an LLM.
Got it.
Or document conversion, where you could send a PDF and we can pull out all the text, or send a picture that has text in it, like that Liberty safe behind us, and we could pull out Liberty. And did that for a few years, and then just went on this arc of bouncing around. I went to a Series A funded chatbot startup when that was kind of the hit thing. Then I went into the financial services, worked at Capital One and Wells Fargo, building machine learning platforms to deploy models at scale to do the things we talked about, like credit worthiness models or fraud models or things along that line. And then eventually landed in the video space. I started another company that got acquired last year, which was all in the oral and maxillofacial surgery space.
Wait, say that part over again. There was a lot of words in there.
Oral and maxillofacial surgery. So it's glorified carpentry. So you think of people getting implants, they get a tooth ripped out or falls out, or they do too much meth, and you need to put a countersink in and attach a new tooth to it. That's what it is. But I had a buddy in that space, and he saw a niche. The niche was education for oral surgeons. And we built a company over 7 years where we sold continuing education credits in the dental space. And eventually we got into the hardware side, where we ended up working with a Finnish company to build 1-inch by 1-inch cubed 4K cameras that we can mount over a patient. So the doctors or who the students were could actually see an intraoral shot and watch the teeth get ripped out, watch it get ground down, watch the countersinks go in, and voila, you can, keep your certification. But that.
By the way, let me give you an example of this in the dental space. This is amazing. 10 years ago, I got a mouth guard because I grind my teeth at night. And it was this complicated process where they take this like I don't know, mouthpiece, like think what a boxer would wear, and they spray all this effed up foam in it, and they make you chew on it. That's probably where you get cancer from. And then you're trying to breathe through your nose because you have this disgusting flavored foam in your mouth for like 10 minutes, and then it hardens. They send the mold away. It comes back mildly correct, and they have to shave it into your teeth and all kinds of stuff. That's how I got a mouth guard 10 years ago. I just got it replaced at the dentist 3 weeks ago, and they put this wand. Quite frankly, it looked like a tool a woman might use to satisfy herself. They put this wand into my mouth that he swears has a camera on the end, and he just kind of like rolled it around my mouth a bunch of times. It created a 3D model of my mouth and my jaw and my teeth. And then he's like, yep, that looks good. Cool. Let me touch here, touch there. Boom, clicked a button. And then it was off for processing, and they're going to get back a perfect plastic mold of my mouth to stop me from grinding my teeth at night. And I was like, man, that's just like in 10 years, we've gone from analog to digital in the dental space, which I got to imagine, much like the mortgage space, they probably tend to be a little bit behind in technology. So like, where else are these crazy leaps and bounds happening at the forefront of technology that we don't even understand yet, that's going to trickle into the rest of the economy over the next 20 years? It's there's really all these game-changing things happening that just blow my mind.
Yeah, it's everywhere, like you mentioned. So there's dentistry, there's mortgage space. For me, like I'm an outdoor person now. I work with outfitters. So I've built a company called the Outfitter Guide, where we're trying to bring some technology, like not even AI, just base technology into the world of outfitted hunts, where people are paying to go on these expensive elk hunts, or there's people who pay $60,000 to $500,000 to go hunt sheep in British Columbia. But automating a lot of the stuff on the back end for these good old boys who are working as backcountry guides to make their lives a little easier, so they're not using notepads and sticky notes to keep up with their clients.
Interesting. So yeah, tell us about that transition. How do you start getting real into the outdoor culture, the gun culture, the outfitter culture, and then eventually making the decision to move to the smallest town in America, legitimately the smallest town in America?
Yep. Yeah. Well, two things. One, I wrestled the jiu-jitsu. My ex-wife was a world champion at IBJJF. So like we lived and breathed jiu-jitsu wherever we were going. It was jiu-jitsu, jiu-jitsu. And of course, with that comes other training, whether that's CrossFit, whatever. And like the idea of just optimization, just complete optimization dorks. I look back on it and roll my eyes, but we got to eventually to the point where, we're counting macros, doing all this stuff, and we're starting to look at the food we're eating, specifically the meats and the proteins. And about the same time where a lot of people are really getting into hunting and like the Instagram space, and they're like, this is the best, most natural meat you can ever put in your body. And of course, the light bulb goes off. I'm like, I grew up around hunting, and my ex-wife's father-in-law, or my father-in-law, her father was a hunter in Tennessee, killed a couple deer every year. Every time we went over there, he had a fridge full of meat, and we never borrowed any, but that was the trigger. I'm like, hey, we should get some meat from your dad. And we did, and it was delicious. Did I see a performance increase? Meh, maybe some placebo effect, whatever. But
yeah,
I was like, I want to try to get an animal now. So ended up getting a hand-me-down bow from a buddy, never shot one before, built a range in my backyard in Louisiana, hucked an arrow or two into a neighbor's roof, eventually like figured out how to kind of wrangle it and do it, even though it wasn't really fit for me. And started to try to go down the path of learning to hunt. Ended up doing a little pig hunt, failed, eventually got a deer with my bow in 2018 or 2019, and then went through an unexpected divorce and then went full feet in. That was kind of the arc there. Just super quick over, like, this is a period of months in my life where
really,
oh yeah, this is not years, this is months between when I started to actually figure out how to shoot a bow, kill my first deer, and then I'm out in the woods of Idaho.
I mean, you had a total life change. Like, some people might say this is like a crisis. Maybe you jumped into it a little fast, but like, what was the desire for the reset? Like, was there this calling to nature, or did you eat your first deer heart and you're like, I'm one with the land, I'm now a Native American? Or like, what? That seems like the only person I can think of that made that much of a radical shift is a buddy of mine. Shout out to Scuba Tony down in Cozumel, Mexico. He fell in love with diving, took all of his vacation time as an LA County sheriff over like 4 months to go diving, ended up in Cozumel, called his sergeant and said, hey, I quit. Called his mom, said, sell the house, sell everything. I'm staying in Cozumel to open a dive shop. And I'm like, what? And then I went diving with him, and it's clear that that's just his passion. That's what he was meant for. So what the hell happened that you went from, like, obviously divorces can be a pretty jarring event, but, suburban living, building the white picket fence, growing the 401k, working for an IBM type company. You're like, nah, I think I should go move to a place where, like, there's, potential water and electricity scarcity if the co-op doesn't work out.
Yeah, which we were out of water all last week, so we can talk about that. And with two little kids in the house, it can be troublesome. It was two things. One, the performance aspect, that's what got my feet wet initially, where I ended up going and buying a bow, trying to learn how to shoot it. Failed a bunch at that. The other thing is, a couple months before the divorce happened, and right after I'd gotten a bow and started to play around with hunting, my ex-wife and I always did like our yearly typical white picket fence vacation, right? We always did this. We'd go to Turkey, we'd go, overseas, wherever it was. That was kind of the cool spot to be at. And then that year, we said, hey, why don't we actually go somewhere in the United States? I've lived abroad. I've seen more of the world than I have of the United States. Never been to Yellowstone, never done any of that. So we said, let's go to Idaho. Let's go to Stanley, Idaho. And we did that over a long weekend, flew into Boise, made this beautiful trip up to Stanley. And in that moment, again, this is right when I'm starting to get interested in hunting and learning about animals. I saw mule deer. I saw a bald eagle fly right by our car. I saw elk, bull elk, cow elk, elk everywhere. I saw, antelope. And when we were out hiking at one point, we saw a wolf. And thankfully, my ex-wife was a special agent, so she got to carry her weapon with her on the plane. So she had we had something out in the woods. But I remember vividly standing in the woods with her. I'm like, we are moving here one day. And of course, she's like, well, maybe once the 20 years are up with the Fed, we'll talk about it. But I had this feeling, I'm like, I am moving to this mountain range. And she's like, yeah, we'll talk about it. Maybe get a vacation home here at some point, and kind of brushed me off. And then it was a few months later when I had the unexpected news, like, hey, well, this is happening. Like, we're getting divorced. And I was left with no kids at the time, couple bags. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to drive north. And I did, and ended up going to Boise for a few months, renting an apartment and looking at land all around Idaho before I ended up finding that town, which was on the south side of that same mountain range I had felt a calling to, and happened to fall into one of the very few pieces of property that was for sale there for a steal, and snatched it up.
So where do you live compared to Boise? Because I know right now you're recording this in Boise because there's no internet signal out where you're at. So how far are you from Boise?
As the crow flies, it's about 80 miles.
Okay.
As the car drives, it's about 4 hours. So you end up going up the Boise River. So where we're at is the literal headwaters of the Boise River, and the Boise River flows through downtown Boise.
Yeah. So do you go up like behind Eagle? Do you go that way?
No, other way.
Oh,
so
other
you
way.
go up towards Stanley and Lucky Peak, if you know that area at all. But you go to Lucky Peak, and there's a dirt road that starts, and it literally says there's 68 miles to Atlanta. And it's 68 miles of just dirt road that's often either rock slid in, land slid in, snow slid in the winter. It's just straight up the river.
So, okay, this brings up so many questions. All right, so you're 68 miles from a paved road that gets, snowed in, landslide in. What the fuck does your house look like? Do you have a year's worth of like water, food, ammo, kerosene? Like, are you constantly bringing a flatbed back into civilization for stuff, or like, is it old school living off the land? Like, describe your setup.
Yeah, it's kind of all of the above. There's backup systems to backup systems. So we actually live quite modern for where we're at. Again, where my house is situated, it's a little 2-story cabin, and you open up the French doors in my backyard, it opens up to 3,000 acres of national forest land. The first bear I shot with my bow, I shot in my underwear off my back deck when it was kind of breaking into our house.
Can you say that one more time?
No, you heard. It was not a misspeak.
Your first bear that you shot, so there's been multiple bears now. The first bear you shot in your underwear from your porch because he was trying to break into your house.
Yeah, and my wife was holding our 3-week-old baby at the time. So it was...
Dude, this is some like Alaska frontier mountain man shit. You're like, you're way more of a man than I will ever be.
There's no Google
I don't know about
Street
all that.
View.
I mean...
There's no what?
There's no Google Street View.
There's no Google. He's trying to find you. Google Street View has not made their way out there. You are off the grid officially.
Yeah, so Atlanta, Idaho. You'll see it. It's at the base right there. There's not many homes there.
There's a restaurant called Beaver Lodge.
Yeah, there is the Beaver Lodge. So, it's open depending on time of year, usually like Tuesday to Saturday. But you can get a nice just burger, French fries, very basic fare, but you can get booze. So that's kind of nice.
Cool. That's nice.
But yeah, so our setup, multiple redundancies, just given where we're at, because oftentimes we're snowed in. We have a road crew there. There's 2 guys that run our road crew. I was actually an elected official in the state of Idaho. I was the chairman of our rural highway district.
Nice.
So we have really good guys. Actually, we have a trust where we have a loader, all sorts of stuff, a road grader where we can get down and clear stuff if we have to. Like, I'll send a photo afterwards, but you might have seen it in one of the signal groups we're in, but we had a huge avalanche that went from the opposite side of the river and blocked the road for 5 days before we could cut through.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, the snow was like legit 17 feet high or something, right? Yeah. It's not like you're getting through that with a 4-wheeler.
No, not at all. Not even with a snowmobile. They're just full ponderosa pines stuck in all weird angles, in a tomb of ice. But the house itself, right? We have 2 500-gallon propane tanks, which again, if shit hit the fan, the propane company is not going to drive propane up, which they do about twice a year, come and fill up when the roads are passable, which is nice. So we have propane gas stove. I have a redundant propane fireplace in the house if we need to, and a few wall heaters in like my daughter's room and other places that we don't want to do wood burning all the time.
Right.
Our main sources of heat, we have 2 wood burning stoves, one downstairs, one upstairs. The one downstairs is in my like fur shed workshop, and I have no insulation above it, so it can kind of rise the heat and heat the upstairs a little bit. Which means I have to cut 5-6 cords of wood to fill our wood shed every summer, which we're already starting to work on now because we go through so much. But we have pine, Douglas fir, a lot of different wood up there that we can get access to.
And so wait, okay, so you get divorced, however that ended. How in this short period of time do you find a new wife who has 2 young kids who you convince to live in the middle of nowhere? Because my wife,
I never said she had good like character judgment.
Yeah, yeah, my wife's game for a lot of stuff. If I tried to pull this on her, like it was hard enough getting her to buy a second home in Vegas 4 hours from her mom. If I was like, we're gonna live off a dirt road 60 miles, she'd be like, dude, you can't fix shit. What are you thinking? Well, like I don't.
Thankfully, my now wife didn't know that I couldn't fix shit at the time. And there was some sort of, primer there where she kind of thought I was probably a little more hands-on than I actually am. But it was interesting. So when I was in Boise, like this happened ridiculously fast post-divorce. I started trying dating apps. The dating apps were well after my first marriage.
Right.
So never tried it. But when I came up to Boise, this was 2 months before the pandemic hit. So I was trying these different dating apps, some success, some not, just playing around, just getting back in the game, I guess. And then I met my now wife on like March 15th, 2020. And literally we went on our first date. She came over and I made some food. And a week later, everything was shut down. Nobody was dating. Nobody was doing anything. And by like almost force and function, we were like, well, I guess we can hang out because we've already been exposed to each other. And we did. And this was right a week after I'd bought that cabin. So I said, do you want to drive up a 4.5-hour dirt road with me to a town you've never heard of with no cell phone service and spend the weekend? And
she was like, yeah, sure, Ted Kaczynski or serial killer,
exactly.
Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, that's creepy.
That's how I felt. I was like, wow, this, I even felt weird asking, but she did. She was down for the ride, but she was a mountain girl. Like she's a girl who would do like, 15-day backpacking trips all over different mountain ranges. So she was outdoorsy. And
so she's the real tough one in the family. You're the keyboard warrior and she's actually the one. Tell us the truth. She's the one that killed the bear.
I'll tell you the truth. She's the one at the cabin right now with 2 young kids and 2 big dogs holding down the fort. So yes.
Yeah, she's the tough one. Answer. That's awesome.
But so she's gangster by all accounts as far as an outdoor woman goes. She was sending me more pictures of wild mushrooms she found today with my daughter. But went up there and short order, a couple months later, we found out we were pregnant with our first kid. It was awesome. It was not expected. And then we got married and then lo and behold, we have another kid and we've just built this life in the middle of freaking nowhere. And she's been down for the ride. And, we've had our scares. Like she almost died when she was 5 months pregnant with our second kid, which was horrifying, but also kind of an interesting story.
Yeah. Are you comfortable talking about that now that it's in
the
rearview mirror?
Yeah. I'm comfortable. Everybody's fine. The baby's fine. He was born, but we, that dichotomy you talked about, we were both living this dichotomy, an interesting life because we ended up getting Starlink. Thanks, Elon. So I was able to hold down and continue to work and pay the bills with my AI focused tech job. Right. So think Zoom calls during the day, run trap line, like wake up, run trap lines at 3 a.m., come back covered in blood, getting on Zoom calls, there'd be some animal in some form of dis or undress behind me at any given call. And, you think that would be a little bit of a bad thing in the tech world, but I can't tell you how many people would message me afterwards, like people from Google, wherever, they'd be like, What's your story? Like, why is there a dead XYZ behind you?
Yeah, and by the way,
7
for
a.m.
people that
call?
have no idea what you're talking about, dressing down an animal means cutting it open and skinning it and gutting it. So
Yeah.
imagine Zach getting on some conference call with a bunch of like Silicon Valley, San Francisco super progressives that have probably never seen a dead animal in their life outside the grocery store, and there's a gutted beaver hanging behind you. That must have made for some interesting fodder for sure.
Fodder, but what was interesting to me is so many people, men and women, would reach out to me and be like, hey, like, I can't really talk about this at work, but I'm really interested in what you're doing.
Yeah.
Especially like during the pandemic and even post-pandemic to now, it's people had that realization. And this is why I wrote the book, because this was someone like me. It was writing, to a former version of myself, is former Zach. If shit hit the fan and I had 2 kids, and like, if I peeled away all the layers, all the ego, all the bullshit, my kids would die because I wouldn't have known how to provide for them. And that providing for them means knowing how to break down an animal or get an animal, break down an animal and turn it into edible pieces of meat you can throw on a fire and consume, garden, turn animal fur into stuff that you can actually make clothing out of, finding those animals, trapping those animals, doing it in an ethical way. I knew none of that. So looking back, telling myself my kids would die because I don't know shit. And what was proven to me in like these conference calls and people reaching out is people started to realize that. They're like, yeah, I went to the Costco the other day and bought a $900 generator. I don't even know if I have a plug for my house for the generator, but I'm scared. Or I want to learn, or I want to start to understand what it means to take an animal's life and how to break it down. And that was the biggest shock for me in the tech space, at least, was so many people under the covers kind of like reached out and said, hey, tell me a little bit more about this. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book too.
So tell us about the book. It's written to a, younger, less wise, less outdoorsy version of yourself. Is this going to convince my wife to go live off grid with me? Or is this just like, hey, get out into the wild once in a while and be your feral self? Like what's the premise of the book, Turning Feral by Zachary Hanson?
The premise of the book is really just a chronicling of all of my mistakes. It's written kind of for that potential adult onset hunter, or like I like to say, someone who's a little hunt curious or trap curious, or just sustainability curious.
I like to call that conservative curious. I also have a lot of friends from LA that'll call me and be like, hey Scott, so under the radar. This is like a female realtor will call me. Hey, under the radar, Scott, you're kind of like a man's man, like you do jiu-jitsu and hunt and shoot and stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, I can't really talk about this with my girlfriends, but where can I find like a conservative guy to date? Because I'm over the trust fund guy with the man bun who sits at Starbucks all day and pretends to write a screenplay. And I laugh my ass off. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. You're conservative curious. So this is for the person that's hunter curious.
Yep. So the hunt curious, and it's less about getting people out in the woods or teaching someone. Like, you're not going to read my book and know how to go trap a beaver or go hunt an elk or anything like that. But what you're going to see is just this. You're going to see a trajectory of that former self, the person who is white picket fence, followed all the rules in life, was supposed to get their payout that we were all promised of, this, large booming 401k, this big house, you're going to be fulfilled, where everybody is now realizing that that's not a fulfilling thing. That
right.
It can be, I guess, in some respects, if it's providing for your family, but that in and of itself, a job in and of itself, is not a fulfilling part of life, in my opinion. So learning how to get back and like review history, review what our ancestors had to do. It doesn't mean you need to go get like a traditional bow and crawl around the woods and get covered in ticks and kill a deer, but it's just about accepting that these things exist and it is a part of life. And eventually we will all revert back to that, I believe, once Terminator 2 comes to its full culmination, and the few of us that are left are running around the woods in loincloths. We're going to get there. So you might as well start to accept it. And then that journey of accepting it means you're going to fail and you're going to literally going to have blood on your hands, and figuring out that you might as well start now. Like, there's nothing to be afraid of. You can fail, you can do all these things, but it's just a crime to not try and learn, in my mind.
I love that, man. So, without, you can tell me to shut up at any point here, without diving too much into your personal finances, obviously you still have a job, you still have to, earn an income. What's been, because my mind always goes to the financial side because I've worked in mortgages for so long. So what's been the biggest financial shock of moving out to the middle of nowhere of like, oh my God, we've got to pay for this that I wasn't thinking of, or we've got to, I dropped $15,000 on this redundancy system. And then what's the thing where it's like, oh man, I used to spend so much money on that and now I don't even think about it. Like where's been the money trade-off? And then I want to ask some questions about the lifestyle trade-off.
Yeah, the money trade-off's been interesting because, going out there, my mortgage was low, right? There weren't many people. I was surprised I was able to get a traditional loan for where I was at, but I was. Great when, the interest rates were way better than they are now.
Right.
And so that was nice. So step one, mortgage payment drops down from where we were at in, Louisiana. But everything is expensive. And what I mean by everything is expensive, and, I know some of the signal groups you're a part of too, talking about preparedness, is redundant systems, generators, solar, livestock, feed for livestock, everything adds up. Like, to live an off-grid lifestyle, and I would say we're probably in that pseudo off-grid. Again, we have a group co-op, we have redundancies, but everything's just expensive. And I can't think of one thing that was extremely expensive other than getting my house rewired to take a tri-fuel generator that had an auto failover, a couple grand. But it was just like the things you need to do the stuff you want to do. Like, okay, here's a $10,000 snowmobile to go trap line all winter so you can go trap wolves. Here's a UTV so you can go bait barrels.
Wait, go back to the trapping wolves. Is this to eat? Is this to keep them off your land from eating your sheep? Or what the fuck are you trapping wolves for?
So interestingly enough, I actually get paid to trap wolves. So the Foundation for Wildlife Management is a group based in Idaho and Montana who are actively working to not cull, but reduce the number of wolves because of the elk, deer, and other ungulate populations in Idaho. Wolves are a reintroduced species. They have boomed. Like, right where I live, we have 5 packs that run around. And you will see elk kill, deer kill all winter along the road, and they just decimate the population. And they're growing because, there's not really many people actively going and reducing the numbers. So trappers specifically, you can get paid up to like $1,000 or $2,000 per wolf you take, depending on what region you're in, which is something that I actively do every winter.
So it's like supplemental income to hunt down the wolves to control the population so that the deer and the elk don't get wiped out, which will then, of course, kill all the wolves because they have nothing left to eat.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think the goal is to kill up all the wolves, but, just have a manageable
keep
number.
them manageable. That's what I'm saying. This is something that pisses me off about the media and just our general political malaise right now. I hear that, and because I know enough about people that hunt, I've hunted a couple times in my life. I'm not a hunter, but I know enough, and I'm very close with my uncle who hunts religiously 3-4 times a year, that like this is part of the ecosystem that we've screwed up as humans and introduced species into the wrong places, where now we have to step in and solve the problem, right? So it's like wolves got reintroduced inappropriately. I think wasn't that in Yellowstone or something? They reintroduced them and then it like decimated the elk and the deer population or something. So then we had to go in and fix that and fix that. It just goes on and on and on. And so if somebody just heard you, oh, Zachary just kills wolves for money, it's like, well, yes, that's a cool way to supplement your income. And it's absolutely necessary if we want deer and elk and caribou and all that stuff. Well, I don't know if you have caribou in Idaho, but all that stuff to continue to thrive. It's just part of like adjusting the ecosystem that we've kind of tampered with. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a fair assessment. And like, that's the battle going on in Colorado because they're trying to reintroduce them. And I think they reintroduced a few. And in the region that they introduced them, there's already been multiple, pet fatalities. And now, the people who wanted to reintroduce them are like, well, now they're eating fluffy. Like, I don't want that. I want the pretty wolves to stare at and take a picture out of my car, but I don't want my animal or my pet to be eaten. And that's where this whole balance thing comes in, is like, as we grow as a race and we're expanding, like we take over habitat, and you can talk about whether that's right or wrong, and there's habitat protection, and that's great, but there's only so much carrying capacity for these animals. And that's what's interesting. Same with grizzly bears. You introduce them into Yellowstone, they don't know the boundaries.
Right.
Yeah. It is completely likely that, Yellowstone pack leaves, goes up in Idaho or down into Wyoming. Same with the grizzly. And there's instances of that slowly coming about where they're just spreading. And, sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. But in the case of wolves, and specifically where we're at, it's a really big impact on the ungulate population.
Have you heard of this? I can't remember exactly how it happened, but either it's getting warm enough that like the timber wolves of Colorado are coming down into Oregon and crossbreeding with the coyotes. So I guess from what I've read, wolves are pretty dumb, but they're apex predators, and coyotes are pretty weak, but they're super, super brilliant, which is how they like snake, chickens out of your fully enclosed coop. But now they're crossbreeding where you're getting these super coyotes that are more like alpha apex predators like the wolves, but they're super bright like coyotes. And I think they're showing up over like northern Oregon or something. Have you heard about this? This is like some super predator.
I haven't heard about that, but I do want to correct you on one thing. Wolves are not dumb.
Okay.
I am just the worst trapper in the world, but like both coyotes and wolves, and this is the other thing where there's a misconception around trapping, I think, where people say, oh, you just indiscriminately put this piece of steel out in the woods. Damn, it's hard. Trapping is the hardest thing. I invite anybody who thinks that trapping is just indiscriminate, easy, to come out with me, because you have to go through this process of descenting everything. You're carrying hundreds of pounds of chain and traps many, many miles into some of the most remote, rugged country in the world. And you're expecting, the way I like to say, if you have a trap, that's, 6 inches by 6 inches, if you're trapping in 3,000 acres of national forest land, you're expecting a really intelligent canine to put their paw on a 6-inch square piece of metal in that vast wilderness. Good luck.
No. I've seen the movie, Zachary. You just put like a lasso thing on the ground and it like whips them up into the tree. Isn't this how everybody falls for it in every movie? It's super easy. Super easy. Yeah. Come on.
Well, I'm doing it wrong. I need the Scott training on that.
You got to watch the Wile E. Coyote training on that, man.
I know. I got to kick out my Acme Dynamite. But it's hard is the point. And you're right on the regulation, but wolves are intensely smart. Coyotes are also intensely smart. Like, to do good trapping is hard. But I don't want to hear about a coyote wolf hybrid, because like I'm already outsmarted by both of those. So, I can kiss any opportunity to take a wolf coyote hybrid out of the picture if they're smarter and faster and, more intellectual.
It's a whole thing. They're called coy wolves.
Coy wolves. There we go. We're gonna have to link to that in the description for anybody who's a nerd and wants to read about hybrid animals. What is it? A liger? Is that the lion tiger? I love it. All right. So tell us about this bear encounter. Like, what's going on in your house? Like, when you think about living way the hell out of nowhere, all these considerations are coming to my head. Like, what do you do with your sewage waste? What do you do with your trash? Obviously, there's not a recycling truck pulling up to your house every week. Do you burn? Just like so many questions. So maybe we start with the bear. Did they smell you cooking some venison, or did you not cover your trash correctly? Like, why is the bear moping around your house there?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, when I shot this bear with my bow, my wife was holding our 2 or 3 week.
Wait, when there's a bear by your house, you don't grab the gun, you go with the bow?
Oh yeah. I've never taken an animal with a rifle. I've only bow hunted.
All right, for the record, I'm just putting this out there. Any animal comes close to my house, I'm grabbing like the AR-10. I have no confidence in myself with a bow. So good for you, because I would grab the machine gun theoretically. Yeah, I want to be okay. So go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Bow for the bear.
I'm getting more comfortable with my firearms and the whole suppressor bit. I've got the whole lot now. So we got a whole armament, and choice. But if it's bum rushing me, I might switch. But anyways, the story goes, I did not lock up our trash. And this was our first winter up there, or I guess this was spring. So our first May up there after my daughter was born. I wasn't really as aware of how close and how many bears we have up there, which is a lot. And I woke up one morning and I look out back and I see something kind of in the woods. I'm like, what the hell is that? And I kind of get out and I go in and I investigate and I look around and I see just trash strewn everywhere. And specifically my infant's diapers all over the place.
Oh.
So this bear had sniffed out, dirty diapers in the trash that I had not appropriately secured, ripped into it and spread it everywhere. So I was around picking that up, everything like that. So we knew there was a bear around. There was a paw print on the door going into our downstairs, just a muddy bear print.
Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, I think I got a picture of the bear print somewhere, but it was trying to get into the house. And that was one morning. Fast forward, we go to bed and I had my bow kind of hanging by our bedside and we have these French doors again that open to the backyard. Our infant was in the crib. Just at first light, my wife starts elbowing me. She's like, Zach, I hear something outside. And my wife doesn't cuss. She's a wonderful woman, doesn't cuss. But we kind of go over and we start to creep open the blinds. And sure enough, 35 yards out in the yard, this big brown color, it's not a grizzly bear, but it's a brown colored black bear just sniffing around. And my wife goes, Zach, it's a bear. It's a fucking bear. And, when my wife says that, it's like,
it's serious.
Okay. Yeah, we're on. So I grabbed my bow and I said, go grab the baby. So when I open the door, it doesn't, cry or anything, or try to keep it as quiet as you can. And I did that. I opened the door. I snuck out onto our little patio right there. And in the dark, in my underwear, I drew my bow back and it was set at 35 yards. And I just ripped it right broadside and took it out.
And what happens if the bear comes charging at you because you kind of give it a grazing shot?
Well, training, Scott. But I don't know. I don't know what would have happened. TBD, I guess.
Hopefully you had another arrow ready to be notched or something.
I like to think that I would have been able to appropriately handle the situation, but the reality is I probably would have gotten mauled and eaten butthole force by a bear in front of my wife and child.
Yeah.
But it worked out in this specific scenario.
So do you have a butcher in town? I mean, you only got 35 people. I imagine somebody's got to be cross-trained on gutting a bear if you've never done it before, or did you just go out there and figure it out?
Well, two things with this bear in particular. One, it was broadside, and when I let my arrow go, it heard the string and it kind of turned towards me. So it went in right behind the shoulder, or clipped the shoulder. So when I went over there, I found my arrow was broken in half. So I found the broadhead with good blood on it, and that bear had taken off. Now, one of the weird things about bear is you killed them because they have the most sad, depressing death moan. It's just like this guttural, you can just feel the life go out of them. We never heard it. So I start to follow the blood pretty quickly afterwards. Now, mind you, I'm colorblind as a dog, which is not very good when you're trying to track red blood on green grass.
Yeah.
So I'm following the globules, and bear don't bleed a lot. They're very fatty animals. So I'm following the blood, and I get down in this little ravine that then opens up to just this huge mass amount of buckbrush and land, and I lose the blood. So I do what any good husband would do and go get my appropriately color-visioned wife and my newborn strapped in, and we go out and I get her to help me track the blood. And she can't find it afterwards either, where it ended. And I was so depressed. I'm like, what is going to happen? And then as soon as I was saying I'm depressed, it started to rain. All the blood washed away. So now I'm thinking I had to have wounded this bear. I have no idea how far it ran. It could be miles away, but I can't not try to figure out this bear. So we're sitting there. I'm feeling bad or sorry for myself. And then we hear a moan, and we hear that death moan on that hill somewhere up there. So I spent the next 12 hours up and down this vertical slope, just trying to kick over this bear.
Oh,
and don't find it. And thankfully, it was a cool night, so hopefully the meat wasn't going to spoil. But I went back the next morning and I went right to the spot where we lost blood. And I said it had to have taken the like path of least resistance. And I walked through this really dense stuff and I kicked over the bear in like 200 yards. It was there the whole time, just kind of in this little knoll, like a natural depression in the ground, kind of covered up by brush where it went and died. But then to answer your question, I had done enough hunting by that point and had done enough YouTube, uh, you know, research to be able to skin it out myself. And I did the whole thing. I tanned the whole bear, taxidermied it, the whole lot. So boned out the knuckles, took out the skull. My wife and I sat there and scraped fat off of it for 4 days before we salted it. And then we did the whole pickling bath and we stretched it and tanned it. And now it's on our wall.
whoa. So, oh God, so many questions. How vulnerable are you, because animals have amazing sense of smell. How vulnerable are you when you're out there in the middle of a field dressing a bear so you can at least get the hide back and do all that stuff, the fat scraping and all that stuff? How vulnerable are you to other bears, to wolves, to other predators coming along and wanting a free meal, and you're just sitting there with blood covered head to toe in blood and fat?
Yeah, I don't think much. Like going back to the introduction of grizzlies and stuff, like we don't have grizzlies in our area. But again, there's been unreported sightings and there's nothing to say a grizzly from another part of Idaho can't come over. But I think just the smell of human, it's pretty a natural deterrent. A bear smells a human, they're going to run away. Like they have a really intense sense of smell. So it's very hard to sneak up on a bear and, maybe a mountain lion, which we have up there, but also kind of opportunistic. This was, middle of the day. I don't feel like we're at great peril. Like where I went elk hunting this past year up in West Yellowstone, where we saw grizzly, I never felt comfortable.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
I don't like grizzlies.
Everything in Yosemite is trying to kill you. Chris, my audio guy, used to work there, and he tells us about tourists they're morons. They would go up and try to touch the buffalo, and of course they would just launch them into the trees like 30 feet in the air because a 2,000-pound animal is actually pretty strong, it turns out.
Yeah. Compared to 5'5" so-and-so trying to get a selfie with a buffalo, but it's the moose that scare me. Those things. Grizzly and moose. I've stumbled on so many moose in the woods, and those are some mean, huge animals.
Why moose? Are they territorial or what?
I think they're territorial and just the size presence and the unpredictableness, and they have a straight line speed that can just mow you down if you're not paying attention. And I think you also just kind of brush them off oh, it's a cute moose, and then all of a sudden you're getting stomped out.
Yeah, Chris apparently has some good stories.
Fortunately, the moose also scare the tourists. For some reason, a fucking bison doesn't scare them, but the moose does. Moose are seriously, they're bigger than SUVs. They're massive.
Yeah. They're 10 feet tall sometimes with their with
the antlers. They can be 14.
Holy cow! Yeah, that's terrifying. That's like a dinosaur. All right. So, can you tell us? I feel like I could ask questions for hours. Your setup there. You said you got the propane. You got the backup fire. Do you have solar? Obviously, is Starlink good enough to do Zoom meetings? Because the only thing preventing me from completely doing something like you, besides my wife and logistics and civilization, is I have to have an internet connection. I can't do a podcast or business coaching without internet. So is it good enough to do Zoom and such?
Yeah. So unfortunately, on our side of town, we have a beautiful view of the Yuba Breaks due south of us. Now, Starlink needs a great view north, and half the town has amazing Starlink where they have 400 megs up, 200 down consistently.
Is that a lot, Chris? 400, 200, is that enough for what we do?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's plenty.
Okay, cool. All right, so we got to have north facing house if we move out into the middle of nowhere.
Do people use the local landing strip?
Do people? Yeah. So one of my neighbors is they just bought a place up there right across from me, and he's a crop duster. That's his company. So he owns helicopters. So he'll fly his helicopter or plane in for a week at a time. But Yeah. It is known, if you have like Microsoft Flight Simulator, one of the most tough backcountry airstrips. It's all grass, but you can only really land and take off early in the morning when you can have enough density in the air to take off, because there's a 10,000 foot granite face on one end and then pretty steep stuff in my house on the other side. So we've had instances where people have crashed planes and done that whole sort of thing in the past.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So north facing for Starlink. And then
Yep.
what other systems do you have at your house to like make sure you can live, for months when the snow is a 14-foot snowdrift, Sequoia mountain, pine fir jigsaw puzzle?
It's just, it's not much. Like we have our own little grocery store we built out. So we have a lot of reserves, dehydrated food, stuff we can reheat. We've got freezers, which will last as long as our generators and everything will last. After that, I don't really have a plan yet. So maybe I need to take some more lessons, but
you got to bury one of those like underground freezers, right? Where you like have a cellar that just goes in the middle of the snow. I love that stuff. I love watching.
Yeah.
That
One of
stuff
my buddy bought the lot next to me, and he's a jiu-jitsu guy too. And kind of a adult onset prepper. He's a Seattle guy,
right?
Used to be man bun, kind of avocado toast dude. Now owns a lot of guns, and it's like, okay, we're moving out here, and bought that place. But we've joked about burying a Connex there for food reserves and ammo and everything else like that. But yeah, we don't really have tons more than that, to be honest. We're still on our journey. I'm by no means some off-grid expert, but for instance, we have like a co-op for water too. So we have these catchment tanks. So we can go in my cabin and turn on water, and it's from essentially a town well where we have it all. But there was a leak the other day, and we were up at the cabin and turn it on, nothing. Shit. Well, now we have natural springs that are safe to drink. So, to bathe the kids, to do the bottles, to do the dishes, I was taking 5-gallon jugs down into the town, a mile away, going to these natural springs, filling it up, bringing that back for drinking water, to sponge bathe the kids and, clean dishes. And, we were prepared for that by virtue of where we live, which is nice. But man, even just that shift over a day from like just having water and hot water whenever we want it to now nothing. It's like, you got to practice it a little bit, no matter what, stage you're in. Because even just thinking about what happens when someone in their pillbox apartment in New York City goes to turn on their water and it doesn't come on. And then
it's Mad Max within 5 days.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I'm here in Vegas right now, and we've got several hundred gallons of water because I'm crazy in the house, just because, something can happen. There can be a power outage at the dam. There can be a disruption of service. There can be something. And I'm not talking about end of days. There's an EMP or anything crazy, but it's like, disruption in services can happen. And in the middle of a 115-degree desert, it turns into Mad Max pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we don't have that heat, and it still is even shocking for our little nuclear family. So, yeah, I don't disagree. Like, I don't think that's crazy at all. And, this experience, even the past week, has made me reevaluate what my redundant systems are for water.
Right.
Should I be having and tying into a natural spring, or get some funky water diviner with a stick to tell me where a well is on our property? I don't know.
Yeah. I've got an uncle who's getting up there in age, big mountain man. Like his shed, quote unquote, is bigger than their house because he's got a Jeep and an ATV and a boat and 5 gun safes and mounts on the wall for days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But because he's getting up there in age and he's out in the middle of nowhere, about an hour and a half from Reno, his nearest neighbor's several miles away, he paid for some plan where it's like $2,000 a year for insurance for a helicopter lift. So like if there's a true medical emergency, they hit this button or something and a helicopter shows up within 20 minutes to airlift him into Reno if he had a stroke or a heart attack or something. Do you guys have something like that? Or, you mentioned your wife having the medical emergency. Like what do you do? Is there like a town nurse or something?
So yes. And this is full circle back to my wife almost dying. So we do have life flight insurance.
What's it
So we
called?
do the same
Life
thing.
Flight? Same. Yeah, Life Flight. That's it.
Life Flight Insurance, and it's $69 a year. So first off, anybody going to the backcountry in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Utah, Oregon, you can buy into this, and it's $69 a year, covers your whole family. Do it. If you're going to go play around and you break your leg out there and you don't want to have to walk out, buy the insurance. That was my first piece of advice moving up there, and I took heed of that, and I'm very glad I did. The second thing, our town actually has the most EMTs per capita than any city or village in Idaho. So out of our 38 people that live there year round, we have more seasonal people who come in the summer. We have like 9 or 10 EMTs. We have a volunteer fire department, which I'm on. I'm a swiftwater rescuer for the river. We do a lot of training. So kind of as a community, we actually do a very good job of looking out for each other above and beyond just like the neighborly stuff. Like we're all tied into the dispatch for Elmore County, which is the county we're in. So we all have fire radios and we do training on it. So May of last year, my wife is 5 or 6 months pregnant with our second kid. We're still working full time using Starlink. Yeah, she came into my little fur shed where I was doing my work. She had been working in the other room. We had a nanny, an older woman who was watching our kid upstairs. And my wife said, "Hey, you want to go for a walk? I've got a break. Do you have a break?" I'm like, "Yep." So we go outside. Now, mind you, the second you walk out of our house, there's no cell phone service. So as soon as you get out of the Starlink Wi-Fi band, you're off grid. So we have a 130-pound Cane Corso and a 9-pound Shih Tzu. And we start to do this little walk on our dirt road, just kind of, it's a little ring around like our little area of the town. And as we're walking, my wife, big belly, pregnant, is maybe 40 yards in front of me. Our big dumb Cane Corso named Flash Gordon decides to get the zoomies. And in the zoomies, I yell out to my wife, who's downhill, probably like a 13-degree slope. I say, "Watch out, Flash has the zoomies." And what that did was two things. He was bolting down the hill full clip. She then kind of turned back to listen to me and turned her back towards him. He saw it, tried to hit the brakes, and kind of turned sideways and took her out behind the knees.
Ooh.
I've never seen someone's feet go above their head so fast in my life. It was just like a brick wall. And then it sounded like a .22 rifle went off.
Her head hit the concrete.
Well, there's no concrete. It was dirt. And it had just rained, so it was soft. But her head found the one rock sticking out of the road. And when I say she went head over, you hear the crack, whole body went limp. And, I've been around it a lot. I've done some training. And I ran straight to her, like heart in my chest. Pool of blood, just like in the movies, just like a pool of blood under her head, just starting to scream out.
Oh.
And I did what I shouldn't have done, which was kind of like grab her head and be like, "Hey, Allie, my wife's name." And she was unresponsive. I'm like, shit, she's dead. So I ran the 100 yards back to the house like Usain Bolt to grab my fire radio. I run in, I scared the crap out of our nanny. I told her to call the fire chief in the town. I said, "Allie's dead, call him." And as soon as I said that, I was running out and I was calling in for a helicopter, and I had one in the air within 2 minutes. So the training paid off. But as I had the radio and I was huffing puffing, running back down the hill, calling in for a helicopter, I saw she had sat up. So like that was my first instance she wasn't dead. But got over there, fully concussed, no idea what happened, claiming she was okay. She couldn't remember if she was pregnant until she looked down and saw her huge stomach every time. It was happening over and over again. But within minutes, we had our little town ambulance, 5 EMTs. I removed myself from the situation, went and, told our nanny that I'm leaving the dogs and my daughter there. I'm going with her on the helicopter. And thankfully, the weather was great. Beautiful bluebird day. So the helicopter came because they won't fly if the conditions are bad. They will not. That's the downside. So it could be a cloudy, overcast day and they won't fly. Bird was there within 20 minutes. We were in the Boise Trauma Center within 40. And, 9 staples, a lot of stitches, a bunch of time in the OB, making sure the baby and everything was okay. And we were fine, other than some vertigo and things like that for the few days following. But
yeah, that'll give you a wake-up call, right?
yeah. And that's the thing, like, again, speaking of redundant systems, why we have a house in Boise, like we have 2 young kids. We were tired of like crashing on in-laws couches and stuff when we were down here. So, I scooted in right at the top of the market in
Perfect.
Boise, Idaho. It was great.
Yeah, it happens. The good news is if you were in at the very top of the market, at least you got a decent interest rate on the mortgage.
Yeah, that's the one upside on that. But so when we have to come into town more, we can plan it out a little bit better and go back and forth as we need it as another redundant system. Because, now, like if we see that we're going to be snowed in for 2 weeks and we know it's coming, we'll come down with the kids because we don't want to be in a position where we're stuck up there in a blizzard. Kid falls on the wood burning stove, is burnt, and we're either stuck there and a chopper won't fly. So there's a little bit of that learning to figure out what the balance is for us now that we're not just adults living there by ourselves.
Yeah. It's crazy. I was reading a series of books and called The Ranch. We actually interviewed the author for that, Sean Liscombe. Awesome series of books, by the way. It's in northern Nevada, EMP, end of the world type stuff. And through this weird set of circumstances, this guy has this retreat ranch, and that's kind of where the new government of the United States starts. Anyway, it's a great series of like 7 novels. But one of the things he talks about in there is like, in a dangerous, we can't get to a hospital situation, all of a sudden a little cut from barbed wire when you're, working the fence line that gets infected and goes into like sepsis, that shit can kill you. And it's just kind of bonkers when you start thinking about eliminating modern antibiotics. I had staph infection on my arm from Jiu-Jitsu, first one that I've gotten, and I know exactly how I got it, that dirty buggard. And without antibiotics, that gets real bad real fast. And so, yeah, it's cool that you have that balance of you're not so stubborn. You're like, well, I'll just stay out there and man it up. It's like, no, we got to have some civilization here. So good on you.
Back to me not knowing anything, right? Like this is all a learning experience or experiment for me. And the one thing that I draw the line on is like the safety of my kids. So, I do my best to not put them in a situation that is, for my own ego, where it's dangerous for them. And that's just learning and trying to figure out that balance.
So how did you get to know the town, right? Because I imagine you move into a town with 38 people. You're the weird outsider. You don't know how to trap yet. Maybe you're not bringing a ton to the community because you're not a doctor or a radio geek or whatever. Something that, like, was it a little bit of weird, you're the city boy and the rednecks look at you weird the first time you walk into the bar? Or were they pretty inviting? Or what did that look like?
Oh, yeah. There was a vetting period, to say the very least. And I don't know if I'm still past it or not, but that's actually the whole last section of the book is community. Because I went out there with bravado. Like I wanted to be a mountain man. I just gone through a divorce, screw the world. I don't need anybody, but the environment beat me down. And one of the things I talk about in the book is I had these wood burning stoves and I didn't know how to adjust the flue on it. And it happened to be shut. So I couldn't figure out why my fires were dying every night. And I was waking up like, jackhammering, freezing to death until I finally went and asked the neighbor who then chuckled. And I was like, all right, yeah, this thing, open it. You need air. Oxygen helps your fire. And it's just kind of like those, slow chipping away at like, they realized I didn't know anything, but I was also kind of dropped the guard pretty quick and realized that I had to ask, I had to be open, I had to participate in order to kind of have that acceptance. And it took time.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie Into the Wild, the one that Eddie Vedder did the soundtrack for, about the guy who like burns all his earthly possessions and walks out in the middle of nowhere? So this is where age matters, right? When I watched that, you have to look up when that movie came out, Chris, Into the Wild. When I watched that movie in the theaters, I was a younger man and I'm like kind of romanticized about it. It came out, also in 2007, same time as the iPhone. So when I watched that, I was like 7 years into working at the bank. I'm like kind of hating consumerism and capitalism a little bit. I'm like, like this idea of just burning your wallet and walking across the country, it's like kind of romantic. And then he went out into the wild and lived off the land and died there. And I was like, oh, how romantic, this story of tragedy. And then about 10 or 15 years later, well, I guess 15 years later would have been last year, so maybe about 12 years later, I watched the movie as an adult who's a little bit more independent. And I'm like, wait a minute. This fucking moron had every opportunity to learn from the guy who gave him a ride out there to the middle of nowhere, told him not to pass the stream. You know, so many people tried to invest in him. The dude basically committed suicide. I'm like, what a loser. So I went from thinking this movie's like this very romanticized vision of what it means to give everything up to like, what a moron. That's cool that you wanted to go live off the land, but don't be such a pompous asshole. You kill yourself and, you know, leave your sister behind with no brother. And it's like, it's just funny how the juxtaposition of watching that movie 10, 12 years later in a different part of life, it's like, yes, I hope now I would have the maturity to let my guard down instead of let my family freeze and be like, hey, neighbor, can someone teach me how to work this wood stove?
Yeah. And that, I mean, I think is everyone's battle, and especially like, you do jujitsu, I do jujitsu, you know, I've wrestled. It's always this competitive spirit, and it's always, you're always battling the ego. It's like, yeah, you might get tapped by a blue belt, but you know, why risk a rotator cuff injury if you get caught? Just tap. Mm-hmm. But that comes with age and injury and, you know, eating humble pie all the time. So I at least had that background to kind of know, like, you know, I know when there's a hill I don't want to die on, and I didn't want to die on that hill. You know, I wasn't a Navy SEAL. I didn't like love getting in cold water, so I didn't like sitting around freezing. So
totally fair. A couple more questions, man. Like, what's been the biggest aha moment, good, bad, indifferent, of living up there? Like, has it made you closer? Well, I guess you don't really know because you met your wife right after you bought it. But is there been a big aha moment? Like, yeah, this is what I was looking for, or this is something I didn't expect? Or conversely, are you, oh man, sunk cost fallacy? I wish I wouldn't have done this. This is not for me. Like, where are you at in kind of your headspace?
Well, 100% not on the whole sunk cost. Like, it's the perfect thing for us. And like, now that we've found kind of the balance, it's even better. The thing that I think for us has just been amazing is the ability to unplug while we're up there. Like I said, like, we do have Starlink. So, you know, if my daughter wants to watch Coco Melon, or if my wife and I want to watch Netflix on the iPad, we can. Like, we don't have a TV or anything, but and again, we don't have much to compare it to because we kind of started it there. I mean, I had my ex-wife, we didn't have kids, but just the aspect of having to do everything, and even like our 2-year-old helps out with stuff. I think just that aspect of like, this is a communal thing for us to continue living up here. Meaning, like, if my wife sees the dumbwaiter full of woods out, she's going to go take an axe and chop more wood, or vice versa. And my little daughter will help pick up the pieces, and she knows to put them in the little dumbwaiter and take them up. She knows how to, you know, open it and look in the fire. And, you know, I think just that aspect of kind of that, dare I say, like, traditional, like, tribalism and community, even just within our nuclear family. And then you expand that out to the 38 people who live there. It's great. I think that's been the most beneficial thing for us. And when I don't want to talk to somebody, I walk 40 feet out of my house and I don't have to talk to anybody. It's amazing. I can't talk to anybody is a better way to.
And have you put down some jiu-jitsu mats so you and your neighbor can practice?
So we're talking about doing the Atlanta Jiu-Jitsu school. So I might take some other people's ideas in our group to do like a Connex full of mats. But yeah, I think we're going to have an outpost out there, which would be awesome for training camps, because it's a amazing place to go out, camp, and, you know, have just a big community of jiu-jitsu guys out in the middle of the woods. And then worst case, we can go, like, you know, wrestle a bear or a wolf or something like that.
Yeah, hard pass on that. But yeah, I will come to your inaugural Atlanta, Idaho jiu-jitsu camp, because I've only been doing it for 3 years. I wrestled a little bit in high school. I was a average or below average wrestler on like a state championship team. So I basically just got my ass kicked for 2 years because I started late. And then what's that?
That counts, though.
That counts. Yeah. I got the Iron Man award for being at every practice and just getting my ass beat. And then about 3 years ago, after I decided boxing, probably not a good idea when you're 40, like, don't need any more brain damage, I switched over to jiu-jitsu, and I absolutely loved it. I've been to a bunch of camps, and I try to get in 4 or 5 sessions a week, and just totally in love with it. Like, that would actually be a consideration for me if we were going to move out to the middle of nowhere, of like, well, who am I going to continue this practice with? Because, like, I don't want to give it up.
Yeah, and that was hard, honestly, because, like, you know, coming out of my divorce, like I said, we were a jiu-jitsu family. Yeah. Like, it was We were at a checkmat, gym with lots of great black belts. Like it was just nonstop, 6-7 days a week, private lessons, 2-a-days, the whole lot. Competing all over, like going to the Paris IBJJF Open,
Wow.
the world, everywhere. We were just training and competing. And then,
Are you pretty good?
no,
Okay.
I mean, if you look at the grands, I was a below average wrestler too. Like, I'm one of those gym guys. Like, I'm a pretty good guy in the gym. I'm not a really good competitor.
Got it.
I don't know what the switch is for me. Like, I'm too relaxed going in, and all of a sudden the guy's 4 points up on me, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh shit.
I had that exact same experience at Naga a couple months ago where I was just like, yeah, this is fine. Like I've boxed, I've wrestled, I've done a couple of jiu-jitsu tournaments, and then I just got like double leg blasted by all three guys, and then they just sat on top of me for 5 minutes, and I couldn't get away. And I'm like, cool, lost 2-0, got submitted. That was fun for the kids to see.
Yeah. No, I've got the same track record. It seems like it's I don't get nervous for a lot of things. Like I don't have like the anxiety in competing because I wrestled so much. But I'm like just too relaxed. And then like I'm older, so I don't really care. Like I don't want to be a world champion. So it adds up. But no, I'm not that great. And I don't know where we're going at other than I suck at jiu-jitsu.
Well, I don't know. Me too. Hey, I could talk forever, and I want to have you back on, or maybe I'll come up to Idaho and visit you, and we can record one there. I've actually got an appointment on the calendar that Chris is going to email right now and tell him I'm running a few minutes late. But I always like to end with two questions. One, this will probably come out. We're actually several months ahead on the podcast right now, which is awesome. So this will probably come out a couple months, 3 months or so. 3 weeks. Oh, you're going to be on in 3 weeks because we moved you into that slot. So we're recording this summer of 2023. I'd love to hear what you're most excited about for the second half of this year, continuing this journey. And then I always like to ask people, what is your favorite movie and why?
Okay, easy answers. I'm most excited that I am going to try to take an animal with a rifle for the first time this year, but I'm kind of keeping it traditional. So I have a muzzle loader. So I'm going to try to do a traditional muzzle loader bull elk hunt in September and hopefully not fail miserably.
Wait, what muzzle loader, no scope, iron sights? You're going to try to get within like 50 yards to take it down with a rifle?
Yep.
Amazing. Good for you.
So I'm excited about that. Favorite movie, Jeremiah Johnson, hands down.
Wait, never seen it.
Oh, you son of a bitch.
Are you serious?
I swear to God. And I'm a movie. This might be the first person that's ever said their favorite movie, and I haven't seen it. How have I not seen Jeremiah Johnson?
Robert Redford, the Crow Killer. Oh man, that is terrible. Just change it, and then the next time we talk, you can tell me that your favorite movie is now Jeremiah Johnson.
You have to watch it like tonight.
1972, a mountain man who wishes to live the life of a hermit becomes the unwilling object of a long vendetta by the Crow tribe and proves to be a match for their warriors in a single combat on the early frontier. Damn.
It's a badass movie. Robert Redford in his prime. Yeah.
Robert Redford was so good looking. Like I think every woman in the 60s and 70s had a crush on this guy. And I'm just looking at the trailer for Jeremiah Johnson, and he's just like
good looking fella.
Yeah, he looks like a manly Ken doll. Blonde hair, blue eyes, super buff. Like, yeah, he's like if Ken doll was a man's man.
Oh yeah.
All right, I'm gonna check this out. By the way, is the Crow tribe, is that like an Indian tribe or like a family that he comes across in the Appalachian Mountains or something?
So I'll leave you with this tidbit.
Okay.
So it's a factoid. Jeremiah Johnson was based on a real life guy, the movie, who was called The Crow Killer. You should buy a book. It's called The Crow Killer.
All right.
The real life story is this guy is a mountain man. He marries his, I think, Flathead Indian squaw or wife. The Crow Indians kill her, and he goes on this vendetta, and his nickname was Liver Eating Johnson, Jeremiah Johnson. He would go and he, for years, just hunted down crows ruthlessly, cut out their livers and took a bite out of it and threw it back on them. And he just did that for years. And the Crow tribe, who was like a notorious warrior tribe, were petrified of this one mountain man they pissed off and just killed and ate people's livers for
Holy
years.
Cow. All right, I'm buying the book right now. I just bought it, The Crow Killer. The story, it's called It's called The Crow Killer, New Edition, the saga of the liver eating Johnson. All right, so I'm going to read that immediately. How did this movie? Because I feel like this has got to be on like my dad's top 20 list, and he did a really good job in the 80s of making sure I saw all the manly movies from the 70s. But somehow this escaped my radar.
I own like 10 DVDs, and Jeremiah Johnson is one of them.
Chris, you've got it, man.
Amazing.
All right, man. Well, I'll
right.
let you go. I know you got an appointment, but I appreciate it. This was a blast, and I know we'll have part 2 at some point.
Yeah, dude, we'll jump on soon. Thank you so much, man, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Later.